it has such a mystique around it, and when you're in the presence of this animal, you feel very overwhelmed. Firstly, because they're so hard to see. So, you know, the prize of being with one is immense. You just know that on a basic level. But on a deeper level, as you work with them more closely, you see the tenderness of an animal that, is sometimes described as angelic.
And we don't even know anything about it. So if you're catching it right at the end of its, proverbial lifespan on the planet, and you're still trying to save the species and understand it, it makes for a very unique experience.
If we're not taking good care of these animals, if we're not protecting them, definitely they will be endangered and possibly become critically endangered. So we need to do something as soon as possible.
From the research that we've done with experts, with anti-poaching units, as well as from our local informants, we know that this is pangolin terrain. But this creature is very, very rarely sighted. It seems that more pangolins are found with poachers than roaming free in the wild. Although we try to find one, our efforts were fruitless. Mostly nocturnal, shy and solitary, they are extremely elusive. And sightings of them in the wild are becoming increasingly rare, because they might already be on the brink of extinction. Traditional medicine or muti markets are not for the squeamish, but from the sights and smells of tons of indigenous plants and herbs to the piles of animal parts, they offer cures for just about every ailment, from cancer to impotence. Among the rows of baboon feet, vulture heads, lion, lizard and snake hides, we find what we have been looking for. Bags bursting with conical scales belonging to a prehistoric creature called the pangolin, an endangered wildlife species that has earned the unfortunate label of the most trafficked mammal we've never heard of. Special Assignment has embarked on a journey to investigate the plight of the pangolin. It will take us from muti markets to scientific laboratories, through rural villages to urban courts, from Gauteng to Mpumalanga and Limpopo. The ground temic pangolin is one of 4 species of African pangolin that is indigenous to South Africa. It is found in the Northern Cape and Limpopo. The other 4 species are found in Asia.
The one we're familiar with is the Temix ground pangolin, also known as the Cape pangolin or scaly anteater. Its distribution is from the Northern Cape Kalahari type sandveld to the bushveld regions, the Kruger National Park area, the Limpopo River area, Mapungubwe, Northwest Province.
Accompanying me on this investigation is SABC cameraman Sipho Mnguni, our special assignment investigator Sipiwe Linda, and conservationist Alexis Creel. She is experienced in rehabilitating many wildlife species. They include critically endangered white and black-bellied tree pangolin pups that were hand-reared at Sanga Lodge in the Central African Republic before being released into the rainforest, back into the wild.
We were on duty 12 hours a day for 6 weeks, 7 days a week. I just knew what a rare experience. It was going to be a rare opportunity to work with these animals that are vulnerable or endangered and on the brink of extinction. It became a very personal thing for me, and it's a species I'm entirely committed to and will continue to do whatever I can to protect them.
Creel has partnered with Special Assignment for this investigation, providing us with access to pangolin experts such as Professor Ray Janssen, who chairs the African Pangolin Working Group. This is a non-profit organisation established in 2011 to research, raise awareness and lobby for greater protection of the species. This prehistoric creature is over 80 million years old, and yet very little is known about it.
They're mostly nocturnal, they're elusive, they're quiet, they don't make a noise, they're territorial, they don't occur in groups. They're just incredibly difficult to find and to count and to estimate numbers. And we can, with great confidence, say the numbers are dwindling at an alarming rate, considering one female has one pangolin pup every 1 to 2 years, more than likely only every 2 years.
The pangolin's plight is in fact a global one. Of the 8 pangolin species worldwide, the 4 in Asia are already classified as critically endangered. The 4 African species are rated as vulnerable. But all 8 varieties are listed on the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Red List of animals threatened with extinction.
Exactly the same as the Asian rhino and Asian elephant. They're sourcing for an easier commodity on the African continent.
It is a trade driven on the supply side by poverty and opportunism, on the demand side by greed. Each year, an estimated 100,000 pangolins are snatched from Africa's bush and smuggled to Asia, where demand by increasingly affluent consumers has spiked unabated. There, pangolin meat is considered a delicacy, and their scales allegedly cure every condition from acne to cancer. They are trafficked dead or alive, fresh or frozen, skinned or camouflaged by legitimate cargo. In July this year, Hong Kong Customs seized over 4,000 kilograms of pangolin scales hidden in a container labelled sliced plastics from Cameroon. This represents up to 6,000 pangolins, the largest seizure of pangolin scales in 5 years. More recently, in August, Indonesian authorities seized more than 650 pangolins found hidden in freezers. But these busts represent a minuscule percentage of the scale of the burgeoning trade in this species.
About 1 million pangolins have been traded illegally in the past 10 years, although this figure might be an underestimate, especially because the level of trade out of Africa is still relatively unknown.
The commodity chain for pangolins is exactly the same for rhino. The small guy on the ground, probably a month's wage, $100 US, then it goes to the middleman, where you've got an exponential increase, probably 1,000% increase. Then it's to restaurants in Vietnam, pangolin fetus soup, $2,000 US a plate. Then it goes to the large commercial Chinese herbal factories, not yet the shops, but the factories in large cities such as Hong Kong that manufacture these remedies. And then it goes out to the herbal markets at probably another 1,000% increase. So although you may exchange one scale for 50 Rand in markets in Johannesburg, that scale can be worth up to 100 to 500 US in China.
In 2016 alone, almost 14,000 kilograms of pangolin scales from Africa were seized in Asia. One can only imagine the volumes that have slipped through the nets of law enforcement. Yet despite the fact that the pangolin could be trafficked and literally eaten into extinction, it has remained under the radar of mainstream conservation campaigns. Yet now, among hundreds of other endangered species, the pangolin has been accorded one of the centre stages at the largest wildlife conference in the world. Known as CITES COP17, it is the 17th conference of the parties to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. The conference commenced on the 24th of September and runs until the 5th of October.
We want the poaching for our lions, our elephants, our rhinos, our pangolins to all stop, because this is our heritage, and we want our grandchildren and their grandchildren to see the rhino and the elephant and the pangolin.
Conservationists have been lobbying furiously for the status of the pangolin to be upgraded from Appendix 2 with restricted trade to Appendix 1 with a total ban on all trade.
There are a number of proposals to uplist all 8 pangolin species to CITES Appendix 1, so all 4 Asian species as well as the 4 African species.
The proposals for and against will be heard during the conference, and the debate will be heated.
We need to, as a government, protection services that are offered from the police, from NGOs like ours, from researchers, we need to give out a strong message that pangolins are untouchable. Certainly in Southern Africa. It's a no-no, it's a hands-off, and we need to speak from one voice.
The South African market for pangolin still revolves mainly around traditional healing, followed by a much smaller trade in bushmeat. We want to find out the effect of these cultural practices on the pangolin, so we have travelled to Bushbuck Ridge in Mpumalanga to visit a respected Sangoma in Acornhoek. This is one of the many rural areas facing a crippling drought and high rate of unemployment. Traditional medicine plays a major role in the lives of rural communities living here.
Now 2005.
The last time I got a pangolin was in 2005. It was given to me as a gift. But in 1993 I bought one for 500 rand. It is such a special creature that you are lucky if you see one in your lifetime.
The pangolin falls in, together with lion and elephants as just one of those iconic creatures. There's something about the actual character of the animal that draws it into folklore, that then draws it into the traditional medicine market, which I think is beautiful. It's part of the culture.
Conservationist Rob Brains has extensively studied the significance of the pangolin in traditional African culture. His research spans South Africa, Zimbabwe and Mozambique, and includes visiting muti markets and sangomas in both urban and rural areas.
The pangolin side was always difficult because when we started looking at it, it had already become difficult to find pangolins.
In African culture, the pangolin is also associated with rain, fertility and good fortune.
There's an African proverb that talks about how pangolin goes through the clouds and the scales rasp together, and that's what causes thunder. And so if you wanted your children to be protected and not be scared from thunder, they'd get a scale. That's more of a rural sort of story, that they're given. Those are the scales that get passed down. Also, because the physical attribute of a pangolin when they're in trouble is that they curl up. And because they curl up and they get protected, if you have a pangolin scale with you, one of the beliefs is also that if you have it with you and you get hurt, you didn't get hurt as badly as you would have because you had your pangolin scale.
The pangolin scales and its tendency to curl up in a ball when threatened protects it from every predator, except man.
The correct way to kill is to put a sack over it and make sure that its blood doesn't spill onto the ground. If you kill it incorrectly, it prevents the rain from falling. That is why we have had a drought here for so long.
Indeed, Mpumalanga and Limpopo have been drought-stricken for several years. Much of the land looks parched, as though cursed, like the Sangoma believes, by the wrongful spilling of pangolin blood. The drought has also made endangered wildlife even more vulnerable, not only to starvation, but to poaching.
This year we're going through an extremely bad drought. A lot of your more nocturnal animals in a time of drought spend a lot more time looking for food and so on, so they spend longer times out, and you see more nocturnal animals during the day than you normally do. You'll see driving around, there's very little grass, so it's very easy to see a pangolin now.
And yet sightings of pangolins are becoming increasingly rare.
I've been working in this area 25 years. I've seen more pangolin with poachers than I have out in the wild, walking free. You don't see these animals.
And increasingly there is a split between rural and urban, between tradition and modernity, belief and science, faith and commerce.
In rural areas, there's small, minute quantities. If you need it, they'll go and find it. But in Joburg, you can get whatever you want because there's so many people. It makes it very difficult, and you can't study the two. But at the same time, you have to, because you need to know the dichotomy between the two. And it's interesting because it's a cultural split, but it also changes the way that you look at the sustainability of what's being used.
As a species listed under CITES Appendix 2, the pangolin is classified as vulnerable, but limited trade is allowed. We asked the Gauteng Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, as well as the province's environmental management inspectors, also known as the Green Scorpions, about the enforcement of the legislation.
Currently, the only thing that you would be allowed to, if a permit would be issued, and that would be under assessment of how you acquired a pangolin, would probably be trade in pangolin scales. We haven't actually had any applications for that, and I'm not sure how it would be handled. But what would happen in that case is that the application would be sent to our scientific services for their input, and also, of course, to the National Scientific Services, which is SANBI, for assessment to see whether the activity that is being applied for would be sustainable and would not be damaging to the animal. And of course, currently most muti operators are not within the law. They don't have permits for the activities, but it doesn't mean to say that they don't want permits. I think to be fair to them, they're very often not aware of legislation. And so to expect of them to know that there is a legislation is a little bit unfair.
The department is planning awareness campaigns, but also intends clamping down on the illegal trade.
We've realized that most of the things that are being sold in the big muti markets in Gauteng do not occur here in Gauteng. They come from somewhere. So what we're planning to do now, as I was talking about the project that we're busy with, we will address those things to say we can actually shut the supply down. So we're looking at that, we're getting intelligence and everything together. So in due course, we'll be able actually to deal with all the people that are supplying these muti markets, if they're doing that illegally.
But surely ancient cultural beliefs involving the small-scale harvesting of pangolin scales, blood and fat for muti purposes can hardly be deemed as a major threat to the survival of the species.
There is a way of softening the scales and then grinding them down and mixing the powder with traditional medicine to treat cancer and open wounds. You can also grind down the meat and smear it around the yard to ward off evil spirits.
When we speak to these tribal leaders and we tell them these animals are going extinct and being lost forever, there's great concern.
Without the pangolin, I can still use crocodile skin and indigenous trees to do the same job.
They would prefer a pangolin, let's say, for certain instances, but they also would like to see their trade preserved in the annals of Southern African history. And that heritage is more important to them than ruining an entire population. And it'll be a tragedy to stop a culture just to save an animal. At the same time, it'll be a tragedy, in the other way around as well.
A recent sting operation in Limpopo. 3 men nabbed for possessing a pangolin and attempting to sell it to an undercover operative for tens of thousands of rands. The pangolin rescued, alive, and subsequently released.
Looks fine. I said to him, it's fine, you can bring the money, we've got 3 guys here, because that is very important to establish how many guys are there, in case anybody is armed and it ends up in a shooting match or something.
Louise Joubert runs a sanctuary for wildlife in Limpopo.
The problem is that poaching is spreading across the African continent like a wildfire. It's getting worse by the day. It has also changed in South Africa, particularly from originally subsistence poaching, with somebody trying to feed a family or trying to put some food on the table, to full-out commercial poaching.
She says it's not only poaching that is decimating South Africa's pangolin population.
It's also the intensive game breeding projects that are really decimating pangolin numbers, because they are electrocuted on the game fences and the tripwires and stuff surrounding these farms. And I don't believe that there's too much interest from the private game industry to conserve the species, because it just becomes another victim or another statistic.
It is estimated that up to 1,000 pangolins are accidentally electrocuted on the lowest electrified wires of game and livestock fences in South Africa every year.
The only way I can sum up fences overall and the damage it does to most of our wildlife, and the pangolin gets hit specifically hard, is When you've got a person who owns 1,000 hectares with a game fence, when you drive with that person around his reserve or farm, call it, he'll say, that's my impala, that's my zebra. When the fences come down and it becomes part of a bigger conservancy, you drive with the person, he says, look at owl. It takes that ownership of its my impala away, and that ownership is very detrimental to our wildlife.
Pangolin survival is also being threatened by deforestation and competition with humans over habitat. But by far the biggest threat is the illegal trade, conducted by middlemen, driven either by opportunism or poverty.
Being the middleman is more important these days than being the actual sangoma, because those are the guys who can get anything. At the same time, the middlemen don't harvest sustainably, so that's where your whole sustainability gets thrown out the window, because they'll just take whatever they can get. But you do get a lot of guys becoming middlemen.
Because it rolls into a ball when threatened and doesn't make a sound, the pangolin can simply be lifted up, thrown into a bag and transported undetected.
And if you can put some parts in a suitcase on a taxi from Maputo to Joburg, it's rather simple.
To learn more about the illegal trade, Special Assignment Investigator Sipiwe Linda visited several Muti markets, posing as a customer. At one of them, he's offered pangolin scales and body parts to cure his ailments. But the young trader, who is clearly not a practicing sangoma, then offers to travel to Mozambique to fetch a live pangolin, at a hefty price, of course. He says white people like to buy them as pets. He says it will take about 2 weeks and claims to have dealers near Maputo who will provide him with the illicit cargo. He insists on a substantial deposit up front as surety. Our investigator then puts me in touch with the middleman.
2-3 weeks.
Yeah, we get it from Mozambique. We have a dealer outside. Yeah, we need to contact that dealer and we buy it from that dealer, so we transport it from Mozambique to South Africa.
Do you do this a lot of the time, or are you just doing it for me?
No, only once. I only did it for somebody else, only 2 people. That other people didn't come when the pangolin was here. Yeah, and it takes time, the pangolin dies.
Don't be tempted to say, I'm rescuing the animal and hand over money. Rather become involved in the project to arrest those individuals so that we can track back to the kingpins that are paying those guys to go out there and collect them, and the money filtering back to the kingpins and the middlemen. And let's stop the problem where it starts, way back at the point of origin, rather than just catching the smaller guys on the ground, because there are thousands of them. Lots of people that are starving and that find that doing illegal trade in wildlife is a quick way of making money.
But clampdowns on this illegal trade are also on the rise. In Limpopo this year, there have been 7 arrests.
The last guy we arrested, he was looking after his cattle and he found it in the field. All right, he picked it up, put it in a bag, kept it for a week. We managed to get an agent in, they made a deal, and the police force were there with us, and we arrested the guy. The chap before that, who wanted 200,000 rand for the pangolin, he had it up in just north of Palabora, and he was shopping around. He had been to a number of people and eventually bumped into one of our guys, and we were able to set up a deal.
ProTrack is a private anti-poaching unit. Established 25 years ago, in the last few years, it has had to deal with a dramatic spike not only in rhino poaching, but also in the illegal pangolin trade.
There's a market starting. The word's out, a pangolin's worth money.
Recently we had a case where we arrested 4 guys who were trying to sell a pangolin. So we charged them for possession as well as for selling of a pangolin without a permit.
The last 3 pangolins that were found were probably from Zimbabwean origin, because the people that were involved in the illegal trade and possession were Zimbabwean, and most probably they found the pangolins in Zimbabwe. So another problem then is that our borders are so porous.
Last year, 2 tons of pangolin scales came out of Maputo. So that is a large corridor, and there are lots of Chinese people working in Maputo, working in Zimbabwe and working in Africa. And it's easy for them to purchase pangolin because that's relatively cheap. It's $20 to $25 for a pangolin.
They rape in Africa, from Central Africa right down to here. They want our minerals, they want our wildlife, and they don't give a damn about South Africans.
But now, through COP17, South Africa is in the spotlight, and some of it will fall on the pangolin. But is there time? Or could this prehistoric creature still be wiped out before most people realize it exists? Or tragically, partly because of that?
The world will be watching Joburg later this year. It's a huge platform. There's been a lot of media interest. And I think if we can put pangolins on the stage there, would be a wonderful opportunity to broadcast the plight of these very, very romantic little mammals.
You have a sense that things are slowly moving into place and that we could win the war against the extinction of the species.
We're trying to save an animal that nobody knows about. And so the avalanche that we talked about with the ivory and rhino horn that you'll see coming, I'm scared that it'll hit the South African conservation fraternity like a tsunami.
We want the poaching for our lions, our elephants, our rhinos, our pangolins to all stop, because this is our heritage, and we want our grandchildren and their grandchildren to see the rhino and the elephant and the pangolin.
CITES COP17, the world's largest wildlife conference, united to save the world's most poached mammal, the pangolin. The decision driven by Africa.
There was an overwhelming proposal to uplist, especially by African range states. And it was very moving to sit in plenary, which is the accumulated meeting of all of the parties.
Suffice to say, the cheers by members on the uplisting of species is a celebration for the sake of the animals that cannot speak for themselves.
You know, in the street the next day, the poster from the Star newspaper, which said "The world unites for pangolins," said it all. From an animal that is considered the most poached mammal that no one knows about, to the world uniting for pangolins. It was a great success.
After months of vociferous lobbying, conservationists succeeded in eliciting the support of 19 range countries to uplist the pangolin status from Appendix 2, which allows for restricted trade, to Appendix 1, a total ban on all trade except for scientific research.
We were meeting together every morning, right up to and leading up to the proposals being discussed and voted on for pangolins at CITES. So we would all meet together under the guidance and expertise of the strong NGOs who have experience with CITES as a group, many different NGOs together cooperating on the conservation side for transferring pangolins from Appendix 2 to Appendix 1. And there was just an incredible feeling of cooperation, setting aside anybody's personal agendas for the sake of the animals.
Alexis Creel is at the forefront of pangolin conservation. She has partnered with Special Assignment to investigate the illegal trade that scientists and conservationists believe is decimating the species. Although the local market for pangolin still revolves principally around small-scale harvesting for traditional healing, followed by a much smaller trade in bushmeat, our investigations have revealed that pangolins are increasingly being caught and trafficked by middlemen who regard this elusive animal as a lucrative commodity.
A lot of our rural people have been approached and have been offered money. There's a market starting. You can see the one guy wants 8,000 rand, one wants 200. There's a market starting. The word's out, a pangolin's worth money.
And demand for this shy creature has skyrocketed in Asia, not merely for traditional medicine, but as a delicacy, fashion statement and status symbol.
They're sitting in China. They're dealing with the end product. They're dealing with the scale. So they don't care. For them, it doesn't matter, because as long as they can get the scale, they don't care where it comes from, and they don't care that the animal had to die to be able to provide them with the material.
Out of the 4 Asian and 4 African species, it is uncertain how many pangolins remain. The conservation world is therefore elated that all 8 pangolin species have been uplisted to Appendix 1, and with little opposition from Asia.
Where the Asian species were concerned, we were pretty sure that they would all be uplisted without too much opposition. I think that there's a lot of focus on China and the role that they play in driving species to extinction. So where it came to, for example, the African species, China abstained.
But it is also a bittersweet victory, an acknowledgement that other measures to save it have failed.
It is bittersweet for pangolins. It's sweet because it's a wonderful success at CITES, and it will lead to greater protection for pangolins. But it's bitter because one questions, why have we come to this point? Why are we at this point where an 80 million year old species is on the brink of extinction? This is our natural history museum, our living natural history museum.
But CITES is about trade, about keeping score, not conservation. And while it might have outlawed the international trade in pangolin, in reality, how effective will the uplisting be in saving the species from extinction?
You can make any law you want, but the only way that a law works is if it's put into effect by the guys on the ground. And South Africa is renowned for having some of the top environmental laws in the world. And yet, in a lot of instances, we see that those laws don't work.
A world removed from the debating, lobbying and networking of COP17 is the Kruger National Park. This is ground zero, the eye of the poaching storm. Covering over 19,500 square kilometers, it contains Africa's largest rhino population. But the park has been hit by over 60% of the rhino poaching. And with approximately one ranger per 50 square kilometers, the scales often seem tipped disproportionately against our wildlife. We are visiting a bush camp located in the heart of the Kruger Park. Initially, this camp resembles a poacher's camp, a transit stop with frayed tent, rudimentary equipment, and only the most basic of supplies. But this is the nerve center of ProTrack, South Africa's largest private anti-poaching unit.
We basically hire ourselves out like a normal security company, but a landowner will pay us, and depending what he wants or how many people he wants, we then run his anti-poaching operation on the farm.
Established in 1992, ProTrack's main mission is to stop the slaughter of South Africa's wildlife. To achieve this, its units have to live and think like poachers.
They've got to live in the bush, they've got to live like a poacher. You can't start thinking like a poacher if you don't live like him. Those hardships they have to do, that's what makes them so good at what they do.
In preparation, they must undergo a grueling 5-week military-style boot camp, during which they are deprived of even the most basic creature comforts.
Now, when the guys come here, they lose all their personal gear. There's no personal. The only thing they're allowed to take is socks and underwear. And no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no matches, no lighters, no cigarettes.
They are trained in weapons handling, combat, recognizing and dismantling snares.
They just take a knife on a fresh tree and scrape it off to make it. So that's also another way you can tell if a snare is fresh or not. Because if the bark and it's still green, you can see it's recently been set.
Their endurance is stretched beyond any normal limit.
It's not an easy lifestyle. I mean, as I said, some of the guys are out 16 to 22 days, no contact with families at home, no fridges, no TV, things like that. A lot of the people who do come are very passionate about the wildlife. And as long as you've got a passion for your wildlife and for the anti-poaching and are able to live in the circumstances, basically anyone who can work with that can basically do anti-poaching.
These are the unsung heroes fighting on the front line of the anti-poaching war. And the danger, the trauma, all this takes its toll, both physically and psychologically.
We had an incident when one of our chaps got stabbed in the neck. The guys helped him, got him to hospital. After that, the one guy said, "Look, I can't do it anymore." That was... He just couldn't do it. So it does, you know, he saw his mate basically almost die.
But you see, that's the thing. Obviously, it's traumatic for you.
Yeah, you know, it takes a toll on all the guys, eh? It does. It's hard, and why some of them stick it out there, God alone only knows, but they do.
And the training has yielded results both on the rhino front and in the pangolin trade. There has been a slight decline in rhino poaching in the last year, and 7 arrests of pangolin poachers in Limpopo since the beginning of this year.
We're getting a lot more info from informants out in the field that there has been a spike in this area.
There's been good arrests. I think in the last week there's been 3 arrests made by the SAPS, not by us. There are positives. We've just got to keep the momentum rolling.
This number of arrests might sound modest, but remember that in 2007, the number of poached rhino did not exceed single digits, and the networks of organised crime syndicates are similar in both rhino and pangolin poaching.
We know that most of the poachers in this area are your level 1 and 2s, which are your normal guys on the ground who actually doing the poaching. Then your level 3 are your traffickers. So your major syndicates in that aren't actually in the area where the poaching is happening. They sit in overseas somewhere, and they've got, it works like a pyramid. Your number 1 on the pyramid is your consumer. Number 2 is your kingpins. Number 3 is your trafficker. And then 4 and 5 are your bottom levels. Those are the people who are actually out on the ground and shooting the rhino or going and catching the pangolin.
But ProTrack rejects a Rambo-style shoot-to-kill policy.
The person that comes to an organisation like ProTrack should be a conservationist. Conservation means we look after. We don't kill. We've got a very naive attitude with this policy we must shoot and kill every poacher. 25 years ago I believed that, totally. A poacher was scum of the earth, didn't belong here. The majority of people pulling the trigger, the majority of people picking up a pangolin is a poor person who lives in a rural area. They get nothing. If we don't fix that, we might as well pack all our wildlife up and just give it to them.
So you need to start off with your grassroots, with the education and your communities.
Why are we not teaching the children about their heritage? We say we're protecting it for them, but we're not teaching them about it. Let's go to our communities, see what they need, and address those needs.
In fact, the unit is closely aligned with conservation and education initiatives in areas like Bushbuck Ridge. This is where we visited a respected Sangoma to understand the role the pangolin plays in traditional medicine.
There is a way of softening the scales and then grinding them down and mixing the powder with traditional medicine to treat cancer and open wounds. You can also grind down the meat and smear it around the yard to ward off evil spirits.
In Acornhook, we visit an NGO called Nourish that works closely with ProTrack.
ProTrack they're always calling me, asking the help about driving, asking the help about a lot of things. Maybe sometimes they train the ProTracks and they have to do something. They need me, I'm going there.
Nourish is educating children in rural areas not only about biodiversity and food security, but also the imperatives of conserving South Africa's endangered wildlife. Nourish facilitator Prince Nkuna is completely committed to preserving the natural habitat and its wildlife species.
I was having a lot of workshops, community meetings and whatsoever at schools. But now we have 12 primary schools, 12 communities, and more other communities that need to come to us just because of what I did tell them. And they started to see that the people that they're visiting here is not all about us. It's all about our pangolins, rhinos, elephant and elk.
Teaching the younger generation about their natural heritage entails giving them a hands-on understanding about the importance of the ecology by planting trees, cultivating vegetable gardens, and learning about the long-term value of keeping our wildlife alive.
The best way is to conserve our nature. And to conserve our nature is to leave our rhino or our pangolins or whatsoever and act, which is a part of our environment, to survive.
The killing has to stop, the killing of rhinos and the killing of people and the killing of pangolins.
September the 22nd, 2016, World Rhino Day. 6 rhinos slaughtered in South Africa.
South Africa needs to address poaching, and they're not doing it. They haven't done it for years.
And both before, during and after COP17, as Special Assignment discovered, the illegal trade in wildlife is in full throttle in South Africa, in traditional medicine markets where endangered species are openly on display and offered to us, dead or alive.
The Muti shops, they've started operating many years ago, and I think we've been turning a blind eye for so many years. But I can tell you now that after we've received information that people are trading with these species at Muti markets, we're busy developing a project at a national level.
If it carries on like it is at the moment, it's game over. You know, the guys on the ground are becoming more and more desperate. They don't know what to do to protect these animals. People are dying, you arrest people, and they just keep coming. We've got to make up our mind. We've got the most beautiful conservation ordinance in this country. Let's use it.
What is it about an animal that makes people want to slaughter it? Not for food, not for survival, but for profit. Where does that leave a continent like Africa, so rich in natural resources and yet increasingly ravaged by greed? And what does that say about a country like South Africa, where we have such progressive laws around conservation, and yet we seem helpless to prevent the slaughter?
All in all, our legislation is actually quite strong. Where the weaknesses are is in the implementation of that legislation, the compliance from the public that have to comply with the legislation, and then of course the enforcement of such legislation.
We do conduct operations, joint operations, especially with the SAPS. Your hawks, the biodiversity guys within the hawks, the dog unit people, they help us a lot. We raid places like Bruma, Seraldine. We conduct operations regularly.
We might have a strong enforcement team in this province, but other provinces are battling financially, and they have huge staff vacancies in the enforcement teams, where in a province as huge as Limpopo, you might find that you only have 8 law enforcement officers, and they have to deal with huge issues like rhino poaching and illegal hunting of lions and elephants.
Special Assignments investigations into South Africa's growing illegal trade in pangolins reveals that in more remote provinces like Limpopo, law enforcement is being implemented more effectively by private security companies than by government departments, like the Sting operation conducted by a private anti-poaching unit near Hoedspruit.
We know of many pangolin poachers that have been arrested that we have first-hand knowledge about. And we've asked for feedback. I mean, you never get any feedback. You never hear if the guy's been arrested. I mean, one particular case in Messina now has actually taken 4 years just to get to court. In that particular instance, there are 2 police officers involved. To catch poachers is a very, very expensive and time-consuming exercise. And once you catch those guys and you have spent all the money and you've paid informers and eventually you apprehend these guys, they go to court and they walk away with like a 250 Rand fine.
You know, we need our specialist units back. We need a magistrate that understands the problem. We need prosecutors that understand the problem and know how to prosecute. We must get our ducks in a row. It must become, next time you come and do a program, it must be out in the whole of South Africa. You touch a rhino, you're going to jail for a long, long time. You pick up a pangolin, and we can only do that through correct law enforcement.
South Africa's specialised anti-poaching force, the Endangered Species Unit, was disbanded in 2002. But the Department of Environmental Affairs, Green Scorpions, says it is beefing up its policing and that the criminal justice system is fully on board.
So if we talk about enforcement, you're talking about the investigative part of it and the prosecution part of it. So our investigators at this stage, they are well trained. I think they're doing very well in terms of investigating. And I must actually commend the National Department of Environmental Affairs, because there's been programs to train prosecutors.
But to date, in Limpopo, there doesn't seem to have been adequate coordination between law enforcement and the criminal justice system.
Look, I have heard of the Green Scorpions, and we do work with some government departments. I mean, we do work with the ECI and that, but that's more like when we organise special operations, sting operations, we work. But when it comes down to the boots on the ground, there's no real cooperation or working with the government on that.
What is really failing pangolins at the moment, like so many other species, is a judicial system and a law enforcement sector of our country that seems really completely, totally disinterested in combating poaching.
But the scales of justice might be starting to swing in favour of the pangolin. As part of our investigation in August this year, Special Assignment travelled to Tzaneen, where an alleged pangolin poacher was due to appear in court. We received the full cooperation of the police and judiciary and were given permission to film the bail application of the middleman arrested for allegedly trying to sell the pangolin for tens of thousands of rands. The accused, 34-year-old David Chauke, is a Soweto resident, but he allegedly travelled to Thohoyandou in Venda to fetch his cargo. On the 17th of August, he was arrested in a sting operation in Tzaneen.
We are working in an integrated approach, meaning that we've got other role players in the fight against crime. Our colleagues, our counterparts from the environmental affairs, they did contacted us and then about this information on the movement of the suspect with this animal. And we reacted swiftly. Of course, upon arrival, he tried to run away. But then our members, as you will understand that we've got fit members. He tried to run on foot, but he couldn't go away. He was arrested at the end of the day. And thereafter, upon arresting him, then the animal was then recovered.
A few days later, another arrest of 3 alleged pangolin poachers.
Within 2 or 3 days after the Tzaneen incident, we had another one in Molalane, that is Hoedspruit, whereupon 3 people were arrested. They were transporting the same animal as well, and they even appeared before court, and they will come again next month for further police investigations.
The defence counsel for the accused presented him as a single father and first-time offender, but the magistrate took a relatively tough stance.
However, the state further indicated to me that the animal which was found in your possession was going to be sold at plus minus 80,000 rand. I have tried to balance what the state has said and what your attorney has asked on your behalf, and bail is fixed at 4,000 rand.
And while this trial could become a test case for how the South African courts are starting to deal with the illegal trading pangolins, without carefully targeted investigations, prosecutions and convictions, clampdowns on dozens of low-level poachers will do little to disrupt the transnational poaching networks. And unfortunately, law enforcement usually stops where borders begin.
With poachers, there's got to be no bail. There's got to be specialised courts, specialised prosecutors. Poaching has got to be dealt with completely away from the rest of the normal judicial system. I think it is that important to get it under control, because that's how we save rhinos, that is how we save pangolins.
And again we must ask, even with the uplisting of the pangolin to Appendix 1 at COP17 and the increased public awareness of the species, is there still time to prevent it from being poached into extinction?
I've seen more pangolin with poachers than I have out in the wild walking free. You don't see these animals. It's been too late for the pangolin for the last 30 years.
We are travelling to Tzaneen to attend the trial of an alleged pangolin poacher. For this investigation, we have partnered with conservationist Alexis Creel.
It's a species I'm entirely committed to and will continue to do whatever I can to protect them.
In Tzaneen, we decide to conduct an impromptu survey of a cross-section of residents to find out how many actually know anything about the pangolin. It isn't only sightings of pangolins that are a challenge. Public awareness also needs to be raised.
Have you ever heard of an animal called a pangolin?
No.
A scaly anteater?
No.
A huara?
No.
No. Itermego?
Oh yes, I heard.
So what does it mean?
So it's a bug or something, I don't know.
It's a bug?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Not much though.
On the magazine and then the TV.
The TV, yeah, the animal programs, but as for
Pangolin is a unique animal. It doesn't. Haina ke o kwa moshito wa motho. Re kwa moshito wa motho ya ke hide. Ya ke khutrisha, ya ke folder like a round ball.
I lived in the Kruger Park for 10 years, so I should know what a pangolin is.
Pangolin is a very strange animal. Children can grow up without knowing it. And then when it's there, they will call the elders to come and pick it up. Normally they pick it up in a sack. And if it sees people, it will hide like a tortoise, they say. And then where they take that pangolin, nobody knows. Then you can grow up being an elderly person without knowing the pangolin. Yes, it's a very special animal.
In Xitsonga, when we talk of safari, we talk of an animal that only appears during the drought. Immediately it appears, they will kill it. After killing it, they will take all the wrecks from the village, take them to the river, pour its blood there, and do some traditional ceremony, and rain will come.
The pangolin falls in, together with lion and elephants as just one of those iconic creatures. There's something about the actual character of the animal that draws it into folklore, that then draws it into the traditional medicine market, which I think is beautiful. It's part of the culture.
For centuries, pangolins have been used in both African and Asian traditional medicine. But it is evident that there is being a worrying shift from the small-scale harvesting of pangolins for healing purposes to a greater commodification of the species that is unsustainable for its survival.
People that are doing it in a traditional way and understand the use and living with the land and living with the animals and with the plants, do it in a way so that it is there for the next generation and the next generation. And unfortunately that is busy dying out.
Yeah, I think there's been a huge turn of foot in the last 10 years. Asian traditional medicine has got many thousands of years of history, a documented history of using pangolins as some sort of remedy to cure many spiritual and medical ailments. The problem is the 4 Asian species are reaching critical low levels and they're very difficult to find on the ground. So just exactly the same as the Asian rhino and Asian elephant, they're sourcing for an easier commodity on the African continent.
And you have a middleman that's tapping into that and saying to them, okay, I'll pay you, I have a market, and they don't care if it survives or doesn't survive.
The Muti shops, they've started operating many years ago, and I think we've been turning a blind eye for so many years. But I can tell you now that after we've received information that people are trading with these species at Muti markets, we're busy developing a project at a national level.
During our investigation, we visited several Muti markets and were offered a live pangolin from Mozambique by a middleman for tens of thousands of rands. The middleman also gave us a gift, a pangolin foot. We took it to the National Zoological Gardens in Pretoria to be tested. Here, groundbreaking scientific research is being conducted into the pangolin that will have an enormous impact on the future survival of the species. Using forensic technology such as DNA barcoding, which entails scraping and cleaning off the cells from the scales to reveal the pure DNA, scientists are now able to identify the pangolin as belonging to a particular species.
In South Africa, us being the National Zoo, we are the only zoo with a research department with a dedicated responsibility by government to conduct research.
Through genetic profiling, these scientists can identify not only the specific pangolin species, but the geographical origin of confiscated body parts and scales. This is essential to build up a database on a species that is over 80 million years old, but about which so little is known, even how many are still alive.
We never realized that pangolins are the most trafficked animal in the world. And with that came this realization, we have no idea what's happening in South Africa.
A few weeks after conducting tests on the pangolin foot we handed into the laboratory for testing, we received confirmation that it originates from a ground temic or Cape pangolin that is indigenous to South and Southern Africa.
Using genetics, you can also make the link between where an animal is being poached and linking that to a suspect's clothes. If there's a blood spatter or anything, or even on a knife, we will have that technology to say, but this was a pangolin killed specifically by that person.
But as we know from the transnational rhino horn, lion bone and ivory scourge, pangolin parts and meat are traded to service a growing consumer market primarily in Asia, and the illegal trade thrives beyond borders.
We became aware of a big confiscation that came from a Central African country through our Durban port, and then it went to Hong Kong. It was seized in Hong Kong. So the concern of the South African government was, is it Cape pangolins? Is it one of our pangolin species that's being traded? So we contacted the Hong Kong authorities, and they were very happy to give us subsets of the sample that was confiscated. It was a confiscation of 4+ tons, and they said then they will send us back 28 kilos. We had to treat it as forensic evidence.
Forensic tests confirmed that the illegal cargo contained a mixture of African and Asian species. But apart from arrests and confiscations that represent just the tip of the iceberg, how does one identify poaching hotspots?
The hotspot project, if I can call it like that, is going to take us some years. You need to get collaboration from the different countries. You need to get their buy-in.
We have a memorandum of understanding with Mozambique and Namibia, particularly, but not in pangolins itself, but it's a biodiversity agreement, but it includes issues relating to CITES and wildlife law enforcement.
But memorandums of understanding and neighbourly agreements are not worth the paper they are written on unless effectively implemented on the ground. Meanwhile, the transnational illegal trade in pangolins and other wildlife species is on the rise.
It was an animal that I hadn't ever seen in the wild, one that I'd wanted to see, of course, like everybody wants to see a pangolin. And this creature arrived and was put into my arms, this huge big ball. I didn't even know how to hold it, you know, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
Nikki Wright is the Executive Director of the African Pangolin Working Group, a non-profit organisation established in 2011 to research, raise awareness, rehabilitate pangolins rescued from poachers and release them back into the wild. It was Wright's work that motivated conservationist Alexis Creel to take on the pangolin's cause.
I was inspired, or rather pushed, to get involved when I saw a picture of a pangolin that had been confiscated from the trade, holding the hand of a wildlife rehabilitation person. It was actually Nikki Wright's hand. And he was holding her hand in such a human way, you know, with those beautiful pangolin claws, and licking water out of her palm with that lovely sticky long pangolin tongue.
For Creel, who hand-reared orphan pangolins at Sanga Lodge in the Central African Republic, this has become a personal quest.
You have a sense that things are slowly moving into place and that we could win the war against the extinction of the species for essentially what, again, is the indulgence of a pangolin fetus in a plate of soup.
At the CITES COP17 Wildlife Conference held in Johannesburg during September 2016, member countries voted unanimously to uplist the pangolin from Appendix 2, restricted trade, to Appendix 1, a total ban on all trade. This was a major victory for the pangolin and the conservation world.
If we act fast and now, while countries have participated in these proposals, and start to engage with countries directly in following through with the uplisting, then we can work with this CITES legislation to improve protection. But the legislation in and of itself is only legislation. So it now depends on us, and in a sense, the hard work starts now.
But knowledge of the species is still very limited. What is known is that pangolins cannot survive for long in captivity. And like all animals rescued from the illegal wildlife trade, they require specialized care.
They're a very specialized mammal. So there are certain specialized techniques and husbandry and handling methods that you need to know about pangolin. So it's where to keep it, how to keep it quiet, to cover it with a blanket, to keep it in a strong place where it can't climb out through a window or, force open a door, to stop people looking at it. Just all those initial first aid tips, I suppose.
The African Pangolin Working Group has also partnered with the Pretoria Zoological Gardens to provide specialised high care facilities for rescued pangolins.
The first stage at the zoo will be the initial high care stage. Once the animal is stabilised and strong enough, it will then move up to Makalali, where we'll have a pangorarium, which is a specialised pangolin keeping facility. And we'll have trained personnel on site to do the next phase of the rehab.
Special assignment travelled to Makalali Private Game Reserve near Kruger Park. Here, the Back to the Wild release facility treats and monitors rescued animals before releasing them back into their natural habitat. We were shown around by ecologist Audrey Delsink, who runs the facility and is also at the forefront of conservation research.
We actually set up a number of release enclosures of various shapes and sizes to accommodate different species that would come in. So we would facilitate a slow release process, which would be that last phase before they then get released back into the wild. We have got a proposed site for the enclosure for the pangolin, and so at this stage we're basically pulling in funds so that we can get this off the ground and get it up and going as quickly as we can.
Private conservation reserves like Makalali are strongly endorsed by anti-poaching units like ProTrack.
So once that's built and once they release the pangolins, they'll be fitted with transmitters, and then our guys on the ground will physically be able to help tracking them at night and that.
This would be a first for South Africa, but in neighbouring Zimbabwe, since 1994, the Tiki Highwood Trust has developed a successful model for the rehabilitation and release of pangolins that experts believe can be emulated in South Africa.
Zimbabwe has done a fantastic job, and Lisa Highwood and Ellen Colony and the Tiki Highway Trust have been absolutely phenomenal. They work directly with the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife and Police system. There's an open line communication, there's a consultation communication, and it's phenomenal how the magistrates are working collectively with the Tiki Highway Trust and with the police, and it's working.
So why has it taken the South African conservation world and government so long to rally for greater protection of the species?
Nobody wants to fund pangolin research. Everyone wants to put rhino because rhinos are sexy. Elephant is sexy. Leopard is sexy.
I don't think everybody understood the plight of the pangolin until this COP. The department is now becoming more involved in this, and we will find ways and means to see what our contribution can be towards the conservation of the species. I don't know whether we can financially help, but certainly we can help with information.
I don't trust government will at all. I would if there was an African Pangolin working group that was started by the government and we had funds by them and they worked with us and they took it seriously, but they don't. Governments are surfing the rhino and the elephant wave. It's as simple as that.
The future for much of the planet's wildlife looks bleak. By 2020, the number is set to fall by 2/3 due to habitat destruction and the spike in wildlife crimes. Today, the trafficking of endangered species is the 5th most profitable illicit trade in the world, earning up to $10 billion annually.
The problem is, as soon as these animal products have a high commodity, poachers are prepared to risk life and death.
Even after the CITES uplisting, in November this year, several more busts of tons of pangolins trafficked to Indonesia and Thailand.
I feel stronger about prosecuting the person who's buying that animal, because you're actually pushing the markets.
And this is the pangolin part that principally drives the international market. A scale that, like the rhino horn, is made up of keratin, the protein that forms our nails. Asian countries have spoken about establishing pangolin breeding farms to service the demand. But you cannot remove a pangolin's scales without killing it.
Pangolins can't be ranched. You can't farm pangolins. You can't have pangolin farmings and then sell out 10 kilograms here and 5 kilograms there. We do not support the captive holding of any pangolin whatsoever. So that means if we can't farm them, we can't utilize them sustainably. End of story.
And surely the battle should not revolve around to trade or not to trade, but rather the survival of our endangered species.
If we're not taking good care of these animals, if we're not protecting them, definitely they will be endangered and possibly become critically endangered. So we need to do something as soon as possible.
South Africa's Department of Environmental Affairs was allocated a budget of just 5.9 billion rand for the 2015-2016 financial year, less than 1% of the national government total. And of that amount, a minuscule percent is allocated to biodiversity conservation.
We do not have a budget specifically for certain species like the pangolin, but we have a budget for species management and conservation, and in terms of my directorate is 8 million. So we must use that for all the enforcement action that we are involved in.
You know, we need our specialist units back. We need a magistrate that understands the problem. We need prosecutors that understand the problem and know how to prosecute. We must get our ducks in a row.
These guys should be educated, they should be trained. I mean, you can't have a qualified nature conservation official coming to you and say, I have to go to court to testify. How many eggs does a pangolin lay?
We must try to capacitate the institutions. What I'm trying to say here is that sometimes you lose experienced EMIs, and then you've got to train people, and it takes time. It can take up to 3 years for somebody to really, do the job properly.
There are certain things that South Africa have to make sure that we do, such as ensure strict enforcement controls to address the illegal trade, also to strengthen national interagency cooperation as well as international cooperation, also to carry out capacity building activities, also inform the judiciary, hunters, communities, business sector, courier companies, about the conservation status and the threats that the illegal trade pose to the survival of these animals.
But in Limpopo, where several arrests have taken place this year, we were given the assurance by police and the judiciary that pangolin poaching is now a priority crime.
We hand over quality and full evidence to the prosecutor for him or her to be able to put the matter, which is well prosecutable, before the magistrate.
The Zanin trial of Soweto resident and alleged pangolin middleman David Chauke has been postponed until the 6th of December. If convicted, he could face a 10 million rand fine or a 10-year jail sentence.
We are now with the NPA working to put together a database of all the cases that was registered under the police's care system, so that we, have the outcomes, etc., for information. So hopefully in a month or two we will have all that information on cases that went to court and what was the convictions, if there were any.
After CITES COP17, the pangolin is no longer the forgotten species. But is there sufficient government will to conserve it?
As the South African government, we have been conserving, and we will keep on and make sure that the pangolin is there for future generations.
Or are we fighting a losing battle?
You don't see these animals. It's been too late for the pangolin for the last 30 years.
Yet here we are, in the eye of the poaching storm, searching for this creature in vain. And just as we had given up all hope, we receive a phone call from anti-poaching crusader Louise Joubert, informing us that she has rescued another trafficked pangolin and is about to set it free, back into the wild. She invites us to film the release.
I'm very much excited, brother. I'm very much excited. As I've said that it would be like a lifetime experience, because I've also never seen it before. It's only now that we're doing this story that I've heard about pangolins, and I believe there are so many people out there who doesn't know about pangolins.
I don't know if we're allowed to touch it. I'd love to touch more than 80 grand worth of endangered species.
We received a call for help sort of 11 o'clock last night with guys telling us that they had poachers on their property. It's not too far away from us, so we offered to send our guys to sit ambush and just wait for the guys to return and arrest them on their return. Unfortunately, the ambushes didn't quite go the way we planned, and the guys managed to run away. But as our guys were pursuing them, they dropped the bag, and the normal weapons they use, like axes and assegais and stuff, but they dropped the bag. And when the guys opened the bag, they found this pangolin inside the bag.
Alexis aptly sums up the exhilaration felt by the special assignment team.
So this is the very exciting and unexpected culmination of this work, that we've been able to get involved in a release of this incredible, ancient, prehistoric animal.
But already traumatized by its abduction, the pangolin remains tightly curled up in a ball, then slowly unfurls and tries to hide away in the undergrowth. Until Alexis steps in. She cradles it, straining under its weight, and carries it to freedom.
My intention would certainly be to use everything that I have and to make sure that I don't hold anything back in saving the species. And which will be devastating for all of us, if this animal goes extinct, I want to be with it in its last days.